Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, a little different. I know it kind of doesn't go. A little series on my channel called True Crime Thursdays, and every Thursday, maybe not every Thursday, I think I'll start out with every other Thursday, and if it works out really well and people seem to really engage and enjoy it, then I'll do every Thursday. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a case that I think is like really interesting and very controversial, and maybe something that has a little bit of a debate aspect to it, and I'll talk about it. And if that's just not something you're into, that's fine. You can skip this video. If it is, please stay and enjoy and watch, and let me know what you guys think. Comment down below, like it, subscribe, and maybe even give me some interesting cases that you find are the most interesting. So without further ado, here. So today we are going to talk about the case of Charles Starkweather and Carol Fugate. So Charlie was born in November 24th of 1938 to a pretty normal family. He was the third out of 7 kids, and his dad was a carpenter, and his mom stayed at home most of the time, but because his dad developed arthritis in his hands, his mom would waitress when his dad was off work for the arthritis. And his parents were pretty level-headed. Like, his dad didn't really have a drinking problem. His mom wasn't abusive. There was like no real major issues in the family. They grew up a little bit poor, but that was about it. But Charlie was born bow-legged and had a speech impediment, which in turn made him an easy target for school-aged kids. So when he was in elementary school and middle school, he did get bullied a lot because of the bow-legged issue and the speech impediment. And then when he eventually got bigger in high school, he in turn became the bully and actually became very violent. And at one point in his high school career, he actually pulled a knife out on another kid because of the bullying. He dropped out of high school and became did odd jobs here and there, and eventually became a garbage man for the city. So he really got to know the ins and outs of the city. In 1956, when he was only 18 years old, he met Carol, and Carol Ann was only 13 at the time, and actually her older sister had dated Charlie and introduced them because Charlie and her older sister decided that they should be just friends, and Charlie instantly fell in love with Carol, or what they thought was love, but it was a problem because she was only 13 years old. The next 2 years they dated, but nobody really approved of it because of the big age difference. Charlie had told his friends and family that he was going to propose to Carol and marry her, and nobody really agreed with it. And that's one of the reasons that they think that he, like, set him off to go on the rampage that he went on. When he dropped out of school, he got really big into James Dean. It was in that era where the bad boy image was really popular, so like the leather jackets and the sleek backed hair. And Charlie was actually pretty good looking and had a strange resemblance to James Dean. He wore a leather jacket, and his prized possession was his car that he had rebuilt. Just embodied this James Dean persona that he wanted to embody, and he really looked up to James Dean for the rebellion. And January 21st, 1958, Carol Ann came home from school to find father, who was 57 years old at the time, her mother, who was 37, and her 2.5-year-old sister, Betty Jean, all dead. Her mother and father were actually shot point blank in the head, and then her sister was clubbed to death in her crib. When she came home to find that, Charlie actually had been there because Charlie came to her house to see her, but since she was at school, her stepfather said that she wasn't there. They had actually gotten into an altercation, and that's when Charlie had decided to kill her family. When she got home, she didn't run, she didn't call the police. She actually sat down, cooked her and Charlie lunch. They sat at the table, had lunch, and then they moved the bodies outside and lived in the house for multiple days. Family and friends had come to the house to figure out why her mother and her father haven't been heard from, and Carol Ann answered the door all the time and just simply said they're sick or they don't want to see you today. Days later, Carol Ann's grandmother actually called the police because she was getting suspicious of the reason that she hadn't heard from her daughter in a while. So the police went over to the house and they knocked on the door, but they found a note on the door that said, "Everyone inside is sick. Please leave. Regards, Miss Bennett." Her mother's last name was Bennett after she married her stepfather. So Carol Ann had actually forged a note saying it was from her mother. Well, the police didn't go inside right away. They actually searched the grounds, and that's where they found her mother and sister in an outbuilding, and her her stepfather in the chicken coop. By the time the police had found the bodies, Carol Ann and Charlie had actually left already. They hit the road southeast and headed toward a small town of Bennett, which only had 350 people, a population at that time. On the way there, they stopped at a gas station to buy more rounds of ammo. The reason they were going to Bennett, which is only 16 miles southeast of Lincoln, Nebraska, was because Charlie knew he had a family friend that lived down there who had a big farm that they could hide out at. So on the way down there, though, their car broke down and they pulled off to the side of a ditch. A young couple that was on the way home from a date actually stopped to see if they needed help. And when that happened, Charlie actually shot the young boy who was only 17 and shot the young girl as well who was only 16 and tried to rape the young girl but couldn't perform at that time. So they ended up taking the bodies and shoving them in an abandoned storm cellar and headed off to the family friend's house. When they got to the family friend's house, they actually killed the man that owned the house and put him in downstairs in the basement, and lived at the house for a while where they collected ammo and more guns. This is where I don't understand why they didn't stay, but eventually left the house of the family friend and the small remote farm and headed back to Lincoln, Nebraska. I think I read somewhere that they ran out of money and that's why they went back to Lincoln, Nebraska. Charlie, because he had been a garbage man, knew a lot about the community and a lot about the people in the streets. So they decided to stop at a wealthy man's house who happened to be the owner of Capital Steel. And when they got there, they stopped at the house and they forced their way in because only the wife and housekeeper had been home at the time. And Charlie forced the wife and housekeeper upstairs, tied them to the bed, and then stabbed them multiple times to death. And they waited for the husband to get home, and when the husband got home, Charlie actually shot him in the neck and head and then stabbed him multiple times as well. When they found the bodies, they decided that they would call a press conference, and he deputized 100 armed men at this press conference. The National Guard actually came in and started protecting the Bank of Commerce. Banks all around shut down, courts shut down, kids were being pulled out of school by their parents, people weren't going outside. If people had to stay late for a business meeting or something in town, instead of driving home, they would actually get a hotel and just stay there. It was a very high alert situation, and by the end of the whole press conference and after everybody had deputized and everything, there was over 1,200 armed men searching for this couple. But by the time they called the press conference and actually started a manhunt for them, the couple had already decided that they were going to leave. So they were actually heading west down to Wyoming. And on the way to Wyoming, this traveling salesman had stopped and pulled over to sleep, and they saw this. As Carol snuck into the back seat of this man's car, Charlie actually came up to him and shot him 9 times in the head, point blank range. The pedestrian that was driving past saw these people around this car and thought that maybe they were in trouble, having some car trouble, so he pulled over to the side of the road to see if they needed help. And as he approached Charlie and Carol Ann, Charlie actually pulled a rifle on him, and instead of freezing and run away, this man actually wrestled the rifle away from Charlie. Just as he got the rifle away from Charlie, a deputy actually pulled up from the side, and the man ran to the deputy screaming that, "Oh my gosh, that's Charlie Starkweather, he's trying to kill me, he's trying to kill me." But surprisingly, Carol actually got out of the car and ran to the deputy as well, screaming at the top of her lungs as if she was in danger as well. And with this happening, Charlie jumped into the bystander's car that had just stole his gun because it was just parked, and he jumped into his car and stole his car and went on a very high-speed chase. They were going about 100 miles an hour reportedly, which doesn't seem like a lot now, but it was pretty impressive back then. He just kept driving until one of the sheriffs actually shot his windshield out. And at that time, that's when Charlie decided that to stop and give himself up. So when he gave himself up, they arrested Charlie and they arrested Carol despite her trying to convince them that she was in danger. And at the time of the arrest, neither of them had really put front a remorseful demeanor, I guess, until they got into the cells. And that's when Carol Ann started wailing for her mother, screaming out for her mother, uncontrollably crying, and they actually had to bring a doctor in to sedate her so that she could calm down. And Charlie talked to the press, and as he was talking to the press, he smiled, admitted that all these people. Charlie had actually waived his right to a criminal hearing and went straight to trial. And on March 26, 1958, after admitting to the press that he did this, smiling without any remorse, he then turns and pleads not guilty in front of a judge, which is a little confusing to me, but I could agree that he was a little crazy. Charlie's trial started on May 5th, and he had quite a few witnesses on his side. There was a psychiatrist that actually came on stand and said that he thought all of the reasons that he killed people were because of his paranoia. Friends and family came up and said that Charlie was a little bit slow and a little bit crazy. May 23rd of 1958, he was charged with murder and sentenced to death. October 27th, 1958, Carol Ann's trial began, and the whole time throughout her incarceration, she continued to say that she was held hostage and against her will, and that Charlie was threatening her life, and she was very fearful of her life. The prosecution actually had Charlie take the stand against Carol Ann, and in that he just repeated that it was not against his will, that Carol Ann had encouraged him, that she was free to go anytime. He had actually left her alone with the guns on multiple occasions where she could have easily escaped, killed him, or called the police. It took 5 women and 7 men 10 hours to finally convict Carol Ann of murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Together as a total, Carol Ann and Charlie had killed 11 people and taken 11 lives. 10 of those within a 2-day period, and one of those being the gas attendant that Charlie had killed a couple months prior. And stuff, Carol Ann had repeated that she was held hostage. Charlie had threatened her life, that she didn't want to do it. But it's kind of curious to me because Carol Ann actually wrote the governor of Nebraska asking him to hold off on Charlie's execution, to have a stay of execution is what it's called, and obviously it was denied. But it's a little curious that Carol Ann actually was coming to his defense in a way and asking the governor to spare Charlie's life, which if a man had held me hostage and had killed my parents and my little sister, the last thing I probably would do would be ask for you to save his life. June 25th, 1959, Charlie was executed by electrocution, and he finally got what he wanted, which was to go down in history, because Charlie was actually the last person in Nebraska to be executed through electrocution. So his name will always be famous, not only for the killing spree that him and Carol Ann had went on, but because of the fact that he was the last person in Nebraska to be executed. I just want to touch on the subject that Charlie was 21 when all this happened, and Carol Ann was only 15 years old. In 1973, Carol Ann met with the parole board, and they stated based on her age of the tragic events, they would grant her a lesser sentence. So they actually knocked 30 to 50 years off of her initial sentence, saying that they had seen exceptional behavior in her, which she did finish high school in prison. She learned to sew. She actually had a column in the prison newspaper that she not only wrote for, but she ran. She had such good behavior in prison that they allowed her to go swimming in town and to shop in town. So she did thrive in prison, and she did try to exempt such wonderful behavior while she was in prison. And in 1976, they actually granted her her parole after only serving 18 years in prison for the deaths of 10 people. The leaving statement to the parole board was, I'm going to read it off of a paper because I want to get it right because it's a quote. I'd just like to settle down, get married, have a couple kids, dust the house, clean the toilet, and be just an ordinary little dumpy housewife. That's all I want. When they granted her parole, she had to have a plan, and she planned to move to Michigan with a relative that would let her live there and had a job for her there. So that's what she did. She ended up moving to Michigan after serving only 18 years of prison. November 8th, 1981, the parole board actually granted her freedom. So freedom in the parole board's eyes is she was no longer under parole. She no longer had to check into a parole board. She didn't have any limitations on her life. She had complete and utter freedom. She never got married again. She never had children, and she refuses to openly talk about the time with Charlie and the case itself in general. So here's the debatable part about this case. Do you think that Carol Ann deserved to be first let out on parole, or to be second even given freedom from parole at all? In my opinion, serving 18 years for 10 murders is not okay. In my opinion, Carol Ann could have escaped at any time. She could have ran, she could have fought. After seeing her stepfather, her mother, and her 2.5-year-old sister dead after coming home from school one day, that's when she should have told the police. So in my opinion, I think that she is responsible as much as Charlie for the next 7 deaths, because she should have tried her hardest to escape, to get a hold of the police and to stop Charlie, but she didn't. She rode along with him, and she continued to go on this escapade of killing people with him. So I think she should have served life in prison for 7 people's deaths, and I don't think justice was served here. If you have a different opinion than mine about Carol Ann, then please let me know down in the comments. I want others' opinion on this because I want to have an open discussion about it. If there's any other cases that you guys find really interesting or controversial, please let me know too. I will do my research and give you the opinion and rundown of those. I really enjoy true crime. It's something that I'm passionate about, and I love to research and do research about. And if you like this series, please let me know as well, and like this video so I know what kind of videos you guys want to see more of. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks guys. Bye.